almost all of you here are here because you ardently love Chitra's work. And I got a little preview of that as I was sitting next to her just now. Across generations, people have been walking up to her with books for photographs. And it's wonderful to see that because we all complain that people don't read enough. But it was like sitting next to Shah Rukh Khan of literature.
Thank you for that comment.
So the book already has an introduction, and I will dive right in, Chitra. You've written, historic fiction, diaspora fiction, feminist retelling of mythology, and this book is not a typical venture that one would expect from you. So tell us about the birthing of this book. How did this come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I jump into that, I just want to say hello to the audience. Thank you all so much for being here. And it's such a delight to be back at the Hindu Lit for Life Festival and in Chennai, which I have been to many times and I love for so many reasons. So this book is a real departure for me. I would not have thought that I would write a book of nonfiction, but the publisher came to me and she said, this is really a book that is important and I want you to write it. And Sudha Murty and Narayana Murthy had said no to many people, but she said they have read your work and they know you a little bit, so they are enthusiastic about you writing it, and I'm enthusiastic about you writing it. And think about the impact of this book that it might have on everyone, but especially young people. And when I thought about all these things, I realized that this is really a book worth reading. It inspired me as I did the research. And so my hope is that it will inspire the people who read it. Because it's not just that it's about a famous couple. It's about people who rose from really such ordinary backgrounds to become extraordinary people. And I think reading that truly makes us realize the human potential that we all have. And that was the reason I wrote this book.
Well, as your first work of nonfiction, may I say you have succeeded stupendously in telling a book that reads part like a story, part like a factual reportage, but engaging in all its parts. I think that the fact that your publisher felt this was an important story to tell, until I read the book, I didn't realize why exactly, and then I read it. And to think that this partnership and this love between two individuals like Sudha and Narayana Murthy eventually led to the creation of an $83 billion company that employs 330,000 people across 60 countries. And this would not have been possible if these two people had not come together.
This is true because Mr. Murthy had the vision, but Sudhaji really encouraged him, inspired him, helped him at various low points of his life, and she is as much a creator of whatever he achieved. But she also says that he has been very instrumental in whatever she has achieved.
But they are very different people from, you get that right away when you read the book or when you see them in the interviews, you realize that they are vastly different, and opposites don't always attract. That's almost always a myth. But in this case, how did it work? What did you learn from your interactions with them?
Yeah, so one of the fun things about this book is that it's unlike, many of their later interviews, which really deals with their life after they became famous. This book is about their childhoods. This is about their early influences. It's also literally their love story because it's about how they met, how they fell in love, how Mr. Murthy fell in love first.
That's right.
So that he was
waiting
a little bit. So.
Yeah, take us through some of that. The meeting, her expecting him to be like Rajesh Khanna, and then their lives looking a little bit like Amol Palekar's movies. Take us through a bit of that.
Yeah, so you have to imagine this couple when they're very young, really. She has just gotten out of college and gotten her first job at Telco. She's on the shop floor, the first woman engineer to be on the shop floor, and she's having a difficult time because she's, she has to break through a lot of taboos. I mean, imagine going to a workplace where people say if you touch the machine will break down. If you touch the machine, we won't make a profit this year. That's the kind of thing.
Peak patriarchy.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing she's dealing with. And he has come back from a stint abroad where he has decided, I must come back to India because I want to use my expertise to grow the economy. I have a dream, but he's really not seeing any way of making that dream come true. So they're both in difficult spots, and then they meet each other. They meet each other because of love of books. That's how this whole
and she
book
called
will
him
begin.
a global bus conductor.
Yes, a global bus conductor, because through a co-worker, she sees his books. The co-worker who's living with Mr. Murthy reads his books on the way to work. And so that's how she becomes interested in him. And then the co-worker says, oh, why don't you come over and meet him? So she's imagining this, this globe trotter, this world traveled, very suave, very,
debonair.
Yes, debonair, very film star-like person. Because Sudha Murty, as many of you know, loves movies. She still loves them. Yeah. So first she used to be like a first day, first show girl. Now she says it's the first day on Netflix because she doesn't go out as much. But so she's imagining this thing, and she comes, and they both told me this because, the most fun part of writing the book was when I went and stayed with them and, just spent days together, and they would tell me these stories. So she said, I walked in and I looked at him, and he was wearing these thick glasses and a most unfashionable checkered coat, and I thought, this is the global bus conductor. But anyway, then when he started talking and she understood how much he knew, she was interested.
He won her heart.
She was
so we'll go back to their childhood now. And I think that's really interesting in the book as well, because their parallel lives are running along, and then you take us through their conversations with each other. It's almost like being with them when they're with the younger selves. So we are, of course, shaped by our childhood. Even though they are both from Karnataka and different parts of Karnataka and middle-class families, but they've had very different childhoods because of their relationship with their parents and primarily fathers. Can we look a little bit at that in Sudha Murty's case? Because she's this ebullient and optimistic person, bursting with energy and ideas. And he is this person of great reserve and discipline, and it almost seems like he is ethical and disciplined to a fault. So let's just...
Yeah, we should, however, though remember that he wasn't like that in his early years, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk about some very funny things that he did during his courtship period.
Yes, of course. So we'll visit
we'll come back to that.
Because I want to get to the point of courtship and then his meeting her father. So...
but yes, their childhoods were very different. And that is one of the things that I really enjoyed about talking to them, is because they would tell me some of the stories out of their childhood that they'd never discussed before. And in the case of Mr. Murthy, some of them were quite painful. So, I felt very, honored that he really let me into
opened
some
up to you.
Difficult and painful parts of his life.
Well, because his father embodied a form of strictness that is more severity than even strictness. And
his father was
how did he?
severe.
Okay, so there's so much to talk about. One is jumping. You went and stayed with them while writing this book?
Yes. So the book was written over 2 years, and we started by chatting on Zoom. And then I would send them email questions, and they were very, very positive and helpful. Otherwise, I couldn't have. I did all my background research, but really, the heart of the book are the things they told me. So then they would write back their answers, they would send me information, we'd have Zoom talks, but then we all felt that we really needed to kind of be in the same space. So my husband and I went and spent some time with them, and that really made all the difference because, you know, when you look at a person and they're telling you a story, you can feel the emotions that are coming up.
Yes.
And you really can't do that when it's an email interview or even on Zoom.
Yes.
And sometimes we would just sit there quietly as they were remembering. But one of the funny things was, as is true with human memory, you know, it's kind of fallible, right? So
Yes.
he would say something and she would say, no, that isn't how it happened. And then she would give her version and then they'd have a little argument about which version was correct and I would just be listening.
That really does sound like a long marriage.
Yes, and sometimes like, you know, their son Rohan would be there and he had a third memory. He'd say, no, Mom, that's not what you told me. So it was very pleasant to work through all of this, the difficult moments as well as the happy moments.
But was it easy for you? You know, you tell stories of women and intriguing women and powerful women and feminist women and, you know, all sorts of women basically populate your stories beautifully. Now to interact with a man, that to a giant of a man, right? Were there any challenges in drawing him out and getting his stories out?
Yeah, I think he was a little quieter in the beginning. I think, you know, one of the reasons I decided to write the book, apart from the fact that I really thought their story was well worth telling and well worth sharing with people, is that I've known the family for over 40 years. So the way they look at people outside might look at Mr. Murthy and Sudhaji is not how I looked at them. I went to school with Sudhaji's younger brother and they would come and visit and that was long before Infosys, long before. So I remember them from that and they remember me like that. So I think there was a level of informality and trust on both sides. But it took us a while, I think, for Mr. Narayana Murthy to open up as much, especially to give some of those harsh stories out of his childhood where his father, you know, disciplined him very severely or even prevented him from going to IIT even though he had a scholarship. His father said, give the scholarship money to your older brother. Yeah. And, you know, he listened the way many people in Indian families
did at the time.
As that time,
yeah.
Right?
It didn't fill him up with any resentment or bitterness or you know, now when he looks back at that time, the benefit of hindsight, how does he revisit these old episodes from his life? Especially even as a reader, I felt cheated. I felt upset and angry when I read that this boy has earned himself a scholarship and dreamt of IIT and his friend gets to go. And the father says, no, you cannot go because it'll cost, the money comes at the end of the term or something.
Yes, and he said, you know, that money needs to go to your brother for his study, his continuing
so
study.
To always be overlooked and always having to sacrifice or give literally the shirt off your back because your mother has given you a lecture on Karna and said that Karan gave away everything and you should give your shirt away to your brother. I was filled with resentment on his behalf towards his family. How did he cope with that?
Yeah, well, you know, I think he is just, I found out that he was just a very different kind of person. He does have a lot of forgiveness in him. For instance, you know, so they were telling me there's this incident in the book where he's playing, he's making a noise. He's a little kid. He's playing with one of his school friends, and they made noise. And the father was taking a nap, and he woke up, and he came to the room, and he hit him so hard that he flew across the room. He hit his head on a steel trunk on the corner, and he still has the scar. It bled like crazy. His mother was, you know, she was going
He narrated
nuts.
this to you himself?
He did. But he had told this to Sudha
Yes.
during their courting
Courtship.
days,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When he started opening up to her. And she had asked him, she had been just shocked. And then he said something that amazed me, and he repeated this when we were doing the interview. he said to her, I learned something very important that day. And she was like, wow, what did you learn? That was such a severe, physically painful episode. What could you learn? Like I would become bitter after that. But he said, I learned never to hit a child like that. And truly, even when he was, he does have a temper. When his children would make a lot of noise, he would get angry, but he never hit anyone. So, but I thought, what an amazing lesson to learn from that event, So,
indeed. So now to the fun part.
Moments like that were very touching. And,
I'm sure.
I think it took him a lot to tell me that, to put in the book.
Yeah. And maybe it was cathartic at some level also for him.
Yes. I think
to
the book
open up.
was therapeutic
Isn't
for
it? And there are so
both of
many
them.
things in it that one doesn't know about. This is a very private couple in that sense. Their lives are private, other than their philanthropy and what they have done with Infosys. So to be able to find these wonderful episodes in there was really revealing.
Yeah, I think it tells us a lot about the people they became. I think, once Infosys became successful, many of us know their story to some extent.
But we don't know the journey
the early
till
story
until,
we don't know.
Yeah,
but those are the moments that shape people. I think all of us have been shaped by our early lives.
Yeah.
So I think I hope the book will allow people to remember and question and think, what did I learn from my early life experience? Who were the people who were influential in shaping who I am today?
And how can we shape our children? I think as a parent, I got a lot from that.
Yeah.
So moving on to the fun parts, they started dating each other and they would go to affordable restaurants in Pune, which is where they were both living at the time.
And they were very frugal, so they only went to,
Exactly.
They told me, the cheap places.
And then she watched, she was into her movies. Did he ever go to the movies with her?
Oh, he went to every movie with her. Even though he didn't like Hindi movies, he told me this quietly. He said, I really didn't enjoy those movies, but I enjoyed being with her, and she would be watching the screen and I would be watching her. I thought, wow, that is pretty.
And he traveled up and down the train when she would go to visit her family for 9 hours.
11 hours, yeah.
11 hours just to be able to spend time with her, get off at the station and come right back, sometimes without a ticket because there was no prior reservation.
Well,
that was so sweet.
That was very sweet. Those were the dating days, right? So anything to spend a little more time. He was telling this story and he was like, yes, I always thought I'll get off at the next station, so I never bought the ticket. And then Sudhaji said, yeah, and every time the conductor would come and I would have to pay the fine and buy your ticket also. Because at that time he didn't have a job, right? So he's kind of this jobless, romantic, extravagant person who's so different from the picture we have of Mr. Murthy today. So it was nice kind of unearthing that early incarnation of him.
But he was jobless and he had given up his Nehruvian way of thinking when he went to Paris, which was before he met Sudha Murty, where he was working. Yeah. And he bargained for a very small salary, which he, on reaching Paris, realized that he could have certainly asked for a better paycheck. And yet, he, being a socialist at heart, began to see the benefits of capitalism. And he changed. But I'm not giving anything away, but what I found interesting was that he decided to travel around Europe. And even then, whatever money he had earned, he gave half of it away in charity, some to his mother, and retained 500 euros for himself.
Yeah.
So when her father called her a jobless communist, that was well earned, that sobriquet.
Well, so a really funny part of the book is when Mr. Murthy and Mrs. Murthy told me about the first time that Murthy ji met his father-in-law to be, Sudha's father. Now, Sudha's father was very important in her life. Now, he was a very supportive father. So he had supported her in all her decisions. She wanted to go to engineering college. There had been no girl students, but she was determined. He said, I'll support you. He said, it's going to be difficult. And that was actually one of the parts of the book that I felt I was very moved by. She was the first girl student. She was terribly harassed by all of the boys. I mean, there was so much really sexual harassment going on in that college.
She was bullied and sexually harassed.
Yes, yes. But she just stayed with it, and she became the first girl to graduate, because even the principal had said, she won't be able to last, and she's taking away a seat from, some deserving male.
This was an engineering college.
Engineering
that's
college.
Why, back in the
in Hubli.
Yeah.
Right, she was the first. And there were no women's bathrooms, so every day she had to, at lunchtime, she would walk back to her home, which was quite a distance, so she could use the bathroom at home. And the administration had no thought that, okay, we should make a bathroom available for her.
And she used to sometimes cry herself to sleep at night because she had been ragged and bullied so severely by the boys.
Yeah.
She went through something similar then, when this is actually the most
But
fascinating
let me just
part.
finish. But her father had supported her through all of this. So her father's opinion was very important to her. So she had said to Murthy had proposed to her, and in his typical way of doing things differently, they were coming back from a movie in a rickshaw, and he suddenly decided to propose to her. And then the rickshaw driver was very interested. He actually stopped so he could hear what answer she would give. And she said, yes, I'll marry you, but we have to get my father's permission. But that did not go very well, okay? So, in the book I've written about it. So, father has now come to Pune. Father, mother have come to Pune to visit Sudha. She has said, I've met this guy, I like him. And father is eager to meet and to interview this person. And Sudha has told Murthy ji that, my father is a tough cookie. So Murthy ji is already feeling pretty rebellious. So he wears this red shirt, the communist colors. He comes on his bike, not taking an auto rickshaw or anything. So he comes, he's all sweaty, and he's late. And Sudha's dad is already annoyed. So he says to Murthy ji, so what are your plans for the future? Are you looking for a job? And actually Murthy is looking for a job. His first business has failed, and he's now looking for a job so that he can learn and start another business at some other point. But he's feeling rebellious. So he says, no, I want to start my own political party and stand for elections. And he's wearing this red shirt. So Sudha's dad is not happy. He says, well, and are you going to at least take up a job on the side? He says, no, I want to start an orphanage. And Sudha's dad is, every minute he's thinking, the score is going lower.
He doesn't mean any of this, right? He wasn't planning on any of these things.
He felt rebellious. He just suddenly, he wasn't really thinking of starting an orphanage. But that's what came to his mind, Murthy's, and he said it. And then he says, well, so Sudha's dad is so upset that he just walks out of the room, and Sudha and Murthy, they're looking at each other, and then Murthy leaves, and then Sudha's dad says to Murthy, and where in this plan is the family? How is he going to take care of a family? And Sudha says to her dad, Dad, I can also take care of the family, which in fact she will do.
Of course she
will. Right?
Yes.
But her father doesn't listen. He walks into the other room, slams the door, and it'll take the couple a long time before he comes around. So that is the story of how he met.
It really made me laugh. But the other thing that really stood out for me that I'd like you to talk about is her self-belief, her courage to speak up. When she notices after her engineering degree is over, there's an ad at Telco, but it says ladies need not apply. Could you take us through what happened after that and how she wrote to JRD Tata and then the interview that followed?
Yeah, and some of you know a little bit of this story, but she talked about like how upset she was. She was like, here, I went through all this trouble, and look, the same kind of discrimination continues in the work field. So she felt that great injustice, and she wrote that letter. And to, Tata's credit, she got a note back saying, you've been called for an interview, okay? So at this point, she's not even thinking of taking the job, all right? She's already applied to US.
MIT.
Yes, she's applied to many important US colleges. She's been accepted into some. But, so why does she go? Yes, she goes to make a point, but she also goes because her hostel mates, the other girls, they want to get some Pune saris.
That's
right. All right?
Worth 200 rupees or 30 rupees.
They could get them for cheap. So they each give her some money and they say, okay, you're going to Pune, please buy us all saris. So that's one of the reasons. But when she goes to the interview, she's very smart. She answers all the technical questions perfectly, but she can see from their faces that they're not very convinced that she should be hired. And she says, what are you thinking? And they say, and it's in the book, they say that we are thinking, we'll hire you, then you'll get married, then you'll quit, and now we've lost a worker.
And all the money we've invested in you will be wasted.
All the money, training, everything we invested in you will be wasted. And she gave a very good answer. And she's very quick at thinking on the spot. I recognize that even when I was interviewing her, I'd ask her a tough question, and she'd immediately come back with a really smart reply. And in this case, she said, well, what about the men that you hire? When a better company offers them a better job and they go off, haven't you lost the same thing? And they didn't have an answer for that.
Excellent.
So they hired her.
They also said that there's no toilets here. She said, if you don't make toilets for women, then how will you ever hire women or something like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very quick-witted.
Very quick-witted.
And
not afraid of anything. Okay, so she told me this story. No, her brother told me this story. Her brother Srinivas, with whom I had gone to college. He said that when she was quite young, like 8 years old, she's going to, 8 or 9, she's going to school, she's walking to school in Hubli, and it's early in the morning, and she has 2 little gold earrings. And it's rainy, so she's carrying an umbrella. And this man comes out of nowhere and he's trying to snatch her earrings. Okay, little kid, right? She's 8 or 9 years old. Anyone would cry, run away, whatever. She starts hitting this man with the umbrella. And he's so startled that he runs away. And I thought, right from there was something in her character, right? If adversity came up, she wasn't going to back down. She was going to hit it with her umbrella.
She's such a fascinating person. When you read this book, you come away wanting to just somehow find her somewhere and go and give her a hug, because she's such a champion of women's rights also. Back in the 70s, when feminism was not even a known concept in India.
And from someone coming from a small town, right?
She refused to wear a Mangal Sutra because she said that when men don't wear markings of being wedded, why does a woman have to do that? And she kept her own spelling of Murthy. One writes M-U-R-T-H-Y, Sudha Murty writes M-U-R-T-Y. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, and she said, well, she said she had studied Sanskrit when she was little. So she said M-U-R-T-H-Y is not Sanskrit. I want to go with the correct original Sanskrit spelling. And to Mr. Murthy's credit, he never said a word. He said, you please spell your last name like you want to. And more than that, when the children were born, he said, whatever you like. And she said, children will also get M-U-R-T-Y. So, she could be stubborn. So one of the things I found out as I was interviewing them is they have lots of quirks and stubbornness, and, they fight also. And even in this book, and they have some really difficult moments, like when he says to her, you cannot join Infosys. And she's been working with him on this company. She's given all of her savings to start this company. And now he says, you cannot join Infosys because then we'll become like a family-run business. And all the family-run businesses I've seen are corrupt. I don't want people to think of our company like that. But that just, she told me, and I could see, even when she was talking, that even after so many years, she still felt that moment, that
Because
her
she had
heart was
sacrificed
broken.
so much.
Yeah.
I don't think she was prepared to, she ever imagined that he, after all this, giving him the startup capital, leaving her firstborn child with her parents because they couldn't afford a nanny and she wanted to work through it, so they were her savings, right?
Yes.
And after all of that, because of his bad experience at Patni Computers, where there was family involved and the show wasn't running as smoothly as a true corporation would, he didn't allow her. That was, it saddened my heart as a reader as well. And that's when she began to focus on family life, writing and philanthropy. So we should quickly move to that part.
And
because
teaching. She moved to teaching
so,
after that.
we just
but I do want to say, and we won't give it away because, of course, we want people to read the book. There is a postscript to that. After saying to her, you cannot join Infosys, he does say to her, only one of us can be in Infosys, but if you want, you can be that person. But there's something more to that story, but I won't give that away.
There's so much to talk about and time is running out. They've imparted these values in their children also, to not be wasteful with money, to treat everybody as an equal, which is where his own concept of, he left a job offer because toilets were hierarchical there and they weren't given according to democratically for all employees. So what are the values they've imparted in their children and how difficult it must have been, because by now the family has become affluent and the children are aware of their affluence. And at that time to, instill values of
giving.
Giving.
Right? Of philanthropy.
Right, philanthropy and not being,
To
throwing lavish birthday
like
parties or buying
teenagers.
any gifts they want. How did they manage that?
Yeah, so Sudhaji told me that actually it became harder and harder as the children were growing older because Infosys was becoming more and more successful. And you know how children are, they can be very savvy, they know what's going on, so they know there's enough money. So you can't say to them, I can buy this for you, there isn't enough money. So she said that she had to really work through that was one of the most challenging things, that how to bring children up according to the values that I hold, that I learned when I was, a middle class child living largely in either in the village or in a small town. How can I carry this on when they're going to very good schools, they're going to these top schools because they wanted the good education for their kids, and all their classmates are doing things like that. So she said that was one of the toughest things. So she would have conversations because Rohan, for example, he goes to a friend's birthday party, a friend from school, and it's held in this lavish restaurant. And he comes back and he says, I want my birthday party also in that restaurant. And it's going to cost, many thousands of rupees. And Sudha really doesn't want that, but what can she say? So she sits down, she talks to him. And, one of the things they used to do with the children is they would take them when they went places like to the village or so that they could see how ordinary people lived. And she did say to him, okay, I will give you that money because we do have that money. But if you give it to our drivers' children, it will give them like years of education. And if you give it to the restaurant, it's one day of one meal for your friends who already have so much to eat. But here's the money, you decide, I give you 1 week. Don't tell me the answer until 1 week. And then tell me why you thought that. So then, Rohan is very upset. He doesn't like this idea. But finally, he comes back after 1 week and he says, I will give the money to these kids. But I make a bargain. Then you have to buy all these goodies for my classmates and we'll distribute them in school itself. But I want all these extra goodies. So they have a little, a bargain. But she told me she told me in some ways, before she before Infosys became successful, there was one kind of challenge. After it became successful, there was a whole other kind of challenge, even with their relatives, even with their children. People's behavior towards them changed, and maybe she had not expected that.
Yeah, I'm sure, because even,
Even their friends, even their...
But what do they spend their wealth on other than philanthropy, which Infosys Foundation is huge and they've changed lives of millions of people by now, but on their day-to-day living, what do they spend their money on?
Their daily living is very simple. Murthy, my husband Murthy, and I know that because we went and stayed with them. Their food is very simple. They have a nice house, but it's...
Do they drive fancy cars at least?
No fancy cars, just regular cars. They do have security, which they need. But that's all.
They're a national asset.
Yes, yeah. They have to have security, but that's it. And they took us to see their old house, which is just next door. And it was a tiny, tiny house. It had 2 bedrooms only. And downstairs was another flat where Sudha's parents lived. And I really want to make that point that Sudhaji told me many times that without my parents, there would be no family, there would be no Infosys, because they really stepped in for Mr. Murthy. And that is one of the things that we have to recognize. The book made me think about it, that the family sacrificed a lot. But luckily, because of this wonderful system we have in India of the joint family and the parents, some parents helping out, that really made all the difference. But talking about simplicity, they showed me how small that house was. Long after Infosys went public, they continued living in that flat. And Mr. Murthy would always clean the toilet himself, because that was a leftover from his socialist days. Yeah. And he showed me. He showed me that.
Until recently he was doing it. I think I read somewhere his knees are a little...
Yeah. Then he was having health problems. Then his children said no more doing that. Yeah. So they put their foot down.
I don't know how his son-in-law, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, what he has to say about that, and what the Murthys have to say about, a girl like Akshata. And I think she had a hand in the formation of the foundation, the birth of the foundation, because she told her mother to give some money away. How does this work out between the two families? Yeah,
Akshata was really a big influence on Sudha, because she asked her some tough questions, as sometimes our children do. What is your responsibility, Mom? She said, you guys are making money, what's your responsibility? Yeah. So things like that. But they're very cool about Akshata and Rishi. They're just like, oh yeah, daughter, son-in-law. We don't interfere. We wish them well. We don't interfere.
And what was the thing she said when I married Murthy? Murthy was the same person. It's the same with... Remember you were sharing with me that Sudha told you that when she married Narayana Murthy.
Oh, right. Yeah. She said, when... so we were asking, just in between, that now that they have become Prime Minister and First Lady, what do you think? And she said, they're the same to me as when, as before. It's like the man I married, Mr. Murthy, he was just ordinary Murthy to me. Even now, after Infosys, he's the same person. When I look at him, that's what I see. When I look at my daughter and my son-in-law, that's what I see, And, but she's very clear about boundaries. She says, it's not my job to advise them unless they ask me for something. So I wish them well, but they have their lives to lead.
We have just a minute and a half before we end, but I had 2 things to say. One was that I was reading this book around the time of my daughter's birthday, about 2 weeks ago. And after reading the thing about Rohan having to, Sudha Murty advising him, suggesting that he gives some of his money away, I called my daughter and I said, how much money did you get on your birthday? And do you mind putting a little bit of it aside and giving it to our driver? Because I was so inspired by this family that has inculcated these values in their children, despite having so much. So thank you for, giving us a book that can teach us something on how to live in the times that we live in.
Thank you. I do think and I hope the book will be inspirational in many ways. I think the most inspirational thing that I learned from this book is that they weren't special people, right? But they did believe in their values, and they lived it. So, listening to them, I felt every human being can be like that. You know, we can at least try to live according to our values.
Yeah.
And they have shown that it's possible to do that. They are not perfect by no means. They're
of course they are not.
very human. They have many flaws. They told me about things about each other that annoyed the other person, all of that.
Yeah.
Sudha Murty at one point said, if I knew you were going to turn out like this, I may not have married you.
I'm sure many people say that in their marriages, but it's extraordinary to hear the Murthys saying that to each other.
Right, right. But yet, they have managed so much because they believed in their values and they believed in each other. And you know, it's a true partnership. That's what I felt, that they didn't always agree with each other. Yeah. They would have fights, but at the end of the day, they were partners. They had each other's backs.
Sure.
You know, they really supported each other.
But
there was a time when Sudha Murty, she had given up her MIT dream. And when she went to visit Boston, she went to MIT campus and she started crying because she was like, wow, I could have studied here. And when Murthy found out about that, he said, you know, I'll put you through school, I'll pay for it. But he knew that that meant he would have to give up his entrepreneurial dream. He was just doing a salaried job at that point. But he was willing to do it. So that's the kind of commitment they had to each other.
But even so, and due credit to him, but I'm saying that there's a broader narrative here of women having to sacrifice everything at the altar of family life, motherhood, marriage. So even though the husband is willing to trade places, you know, only a woman knows that there are certain things that only a woman can do better than a man, as she said.
Okay, so we'll give away the punchline. So when Mr. Murthy says to her, if you want, you can be the head of Infosys, because really you are smarter than I am. And in fact, she had created, you know, all kinds of presentations for him that allowed him to get contracts in the early years.
After he had turned down.
After he had turned her down,
yeah.
Right? So she didn't bear any grudges.
What a forgiving human being, huh?
Yeah, she doesn't bear grudges. She really lives in the moment. I learned that from her. So he says that, I will give you Infosys. You take care of Infosys, I'll take care of the family. And Sudhaji told me it took her 3 days. She thought and thought and thought. She didn't talk to him for like 3 days after he said she couldn't join.
Certainly not.
Right? She was very upset. But when she honestly made that offer to her, she said to herself, I know I can run Infosys. I can run it as well as Murthy can run it. But can he run the household as well as I can? Can he take care of the children as well as I can? And the answer came up, no. So she said, you run Infosys, I'll take care.
So I think on that note, I will have to open this to the audience, even though I have many more questions to go through. It's not just about Narayana and Sudha Murty. There's so much to learn from and ask Chitra as well about her writing process, but we'll have to leave it for another time. So we have time for audience questions, right?
First of all, a very illuminating discussion. So I'm Sriram, and I have one question and one observation to make. So from your experience with the couple at first hand, just would like to know what makes them tick despite being two headstrong and stubborn individuals. I think after all, like they have lasted for like more than 40 years, I believe, as a couple. So what do you really think makes them tick despite their headstrong personalities? And my second point is that it's not a question, but I'm just wondering out loud whether you said that Mr. Narayana Murthy's father-in-law was quite intimidating when he came to ask for his daughter's hand. I really wonder if Mr. Narayana Murthy was the same intimidating person while he was interviewing his son-in-law.
Well, you know, that part happens much later, so it's not in the book. But yes, Mr. Murthy told me, and Sudha also, they told me they were quite, you know, they weren't sure that Akshata was making the right decision. They were like, are you sure you think this will be a good person for you to marry? But they listened to her, yeah. So I think, parents of every generation, my own husband will tell you that when he wanted to marry me, my mother was quite reluctant because, we come from different parts of India. So maybe that's another universal aspect. And the first question was,
what makes the marriage
them tick?
work? Yeah.
Okay, I think one thing that really I felt made their marriage work was that they always supported each other and they never tried to change each other. So they had a lot of respect for each other's intelligence and integrity. And I think that's really a very wonderful quality when you don't agree perhaps with the other person, but you say, hey, I'm your supporter. And if you still decide, and Sudha told me, a lot of times I would tell Murthy, he'd come up with these big schemes. I'd say, I don't think that's a good idea. This is why I don't think it's a good idea. But Mr. Murthy was quite stubborn, so sometimes he'd do it anyway. And she would say, okay, I told you what I had to say, but now I'll support you. Because I'm your partner, I'm your support. So I think that is one of the things that kept them together, made them tick. She has a lovely line that she told me, and I put it into the book. She told Mr. Murthy something, but I think he also felt the same way towards her. She said, you be the trapeze artist, I'll be your safety net. But I think he also feels that way. When she wanted to go into writing, when she wanted to start Infosys Foundation, they didn't know how it would turn out. But he said, you go ahead and do it. I'll support you.
There's really quality in that marriage.
That's a good quality, I think, for all of us to aim for. So many times when we don't agree with someone, we have difficulty supporting them in spite of that.
Hi, ma'am. I'm a very big fan of you. And as a female author, I wanted to ask you, why did you choose mythology as a field to talk about women's perspectives, whereas there are many other fields, many other genres to talk about? And what will be your advice to aspiring female authors?
Okay, this is a slightly more general question, but I'll answer it. I always loved our epic stories. I was blessed because I had a grandfather who told me all these stories as I was growing up. So, and then as I was reading them more and again as an adult person, I was struck by the women characters, such as in Mahabharata Draupadi and in Ramayana Sita. And I felt that their point of view had not come across. So really, I started with that. It wasn't so much that I wanted women's empowerment. I approached it from the story, and the story that I felt was untold, the woman's story. And then the book just happened from that point of view, both Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments. So I think, character is always first for me as I'm writing. The character has to come alive in me before I can write. Even when I was writing this, I really had to understand Murthy and Sudha's characters before I could write. And so that would be my advice, although everyone writes differently, but I would say always make sure your character is coming alive and you're really feeling the uniqueness of your character before you jump deep into the project.
Madam, I'm Subramanian. There are so many power couples are there in India, but you have chosen Sudha and Murthy. Is there any special thing about that, or any specific choice? You have chosen Sudha and Murthy. Is there anything behind that?
Yes, I think one of the reasons I chose this couple is because of some of the things we said. They are a couple that truly live their lives according to values. And although they have so much, they live so simply and have given away so much. And I thought that story is an inspiring one. Also, they come from very ordinary backgrounds. They are not like, they're not the scions of great, I don't know, like royal families or anything. They're just like you and me. And I felt that's the story that could inspire a lot of people today, men as well as women. So that's why I wanted to write about them. Although now many people are interested in having me write their life stories.
Is this your next gig?
We'll
Biographer of couples of
We'll have to see, we'll have to see. Though, my love is writing fiction, so I'm kind of getting back into writing fiction again.
Anyway, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the great questions. Our time is up. But I am on social media, folks, and you can reach me there. Thank you all so very much.